All right, hi, and welcome to this our Web3 talks. Mustafa, thank you so much for agreeing to join us. It's absolutely wonderful to have you here. Tom and I are so excited to speak to you today. To get started, if it's all right, could you just tell us a bit about yourself, about your background, and about your role, if that's okay?
Of course. Hi, Tom and Sarah. I'm really happy to be here today. My name is Mustafa Kanchwala. I'm a director in Deloitte's risk advisory practice, and I look after our blockchain and digital assets advisory business. And just a bit about myself. Before this, I used to be a compliance officer in industry, in the financial services industry, in the spread betting and CFDs world. So compliance officer and MLRO, which is a money laundering reporting officer. So always had that focus. I did that for about 6 years, and then came into Deloitte to work on something very technical known as client money and assets, which essentially is how to protect and segregate client funds and assets when they're being held by financial services firms. It's a very important area for the regulators here. And after doing that initially, I've then had the pleasure of doing a number of things at Deloitte. I worked on Brexit contingency projects for about 3 years. So I had the privilege of doing secondments at a number of big banking institutions. I also had the privilege of working on some of the new startup banks that have come up. And in the last 3 or 4 years, as blockchain technology and the use of digital assets has really sort of gained steam, I've focused on that area, and that's why I'm here today. So yeah.
Absolutely amazing. Thank you so much. What a background. That's fantastic. And can I ask, so what was when you started looking at digital assets and blockchain technologies with all of your experience, was there a moment when you thought, hang on a minute, I want to pay attention to this? Or what happened that really turned your head in terms of thinking, this is something that I want to understand, this is something that I want to look into, in terms of just how you got into it in the first place?
So there's two ways that if I got into it. There was a personal way where um, I had a set of close friends, and one of them is actually an architect by profession, but really grew into blockchain technology and how cryptocurrencies work and the various projects that were out there. This is back in 2018, 2019. And he got us into it, a few of us. And that's where I sort of dipped my feet into trading cryptocurrencies, understanding more, and sort of the various white papers which were out there. But it hadn't gained traction from a work perspective. From a work perspective, though, is I was on paternity in 2019 and early 2020, and when I came back, and that's the beauty of professional services. You get to try different things. When I came back, I was offered to sort of research further into blockchain and crypto, and understand how it's going to change things going forward, and how our clients may be affected, and then what needs to be carried out in order to sort of manage the risk around that, because obviously there was still a lot of skepticism. There's still a lot today, but in trying to do that, I sort of learned more. And then there was this first client which I got to lead a project on around sort of managing the entire risk management framework on various use cases and the use of DLT within the organization. And that I would say was sort of my wow moment, because there was a lot of learnings. And then I think after being on the project for about 6 months, doing a lot of research, I realized that this is something which I want to do in the longer term and focus on, because I see a lot of promise here on a global scale, and not just within financial services, but also across a number of other sectors. So.
And can I ask, so thank you so much. Can I ask, when you talk about the promise, and that's really interesting to know the kind of projects and where you've come from, your background and your role, and I guess the expectations that people would have of working with Deloitte as well in terms of your professional services. When you think about the promise, or when you're thinking about it, even talking to your friends and thinking socially, when I'm sure, I don't know about you, I get asked a lot of questions stood around my friends, like, what is this? And where does the promise come from? Whether within financial services or also outside, as you mentioned, what are the things that you see? What is the promise? Like the things that are the promise of what could be?
Sure. So I think everyone knows about sort of the phenomena of various industrial revolutions. So we went through the first one, the second one, the third one, and the fourth one now is ongoing. And I think part of that is how we sort of leverage technology to do things better, faster, and more efficiently, and from an economic perspective as well. And Web3 is the sort of larger ecosystem, which is where the changes will happen. So if we just go back 20 years or 22 years, I had my first mobile phone, which I sort of got at the age of, I think I was about 17 then. And you still didn't have smartphones. Smartphones sort of came only in the last 17 or 18 years, but we can't really sort of imagine life without them. And we had sort of skepticism then as well. But what sort of a lot of these examples tell us is technological change will happen, irrespective of how it's received, and you have to be ready for it. And I think that's what has been sort of the realization factor for a lot of organizations globally, including regulators. So we discussed sort of the stigma around crypto and a lot of bad press it got, and it still has been getting. But one of the main things which I'm sure you all have come across, and I do, and a lot of my peers in industry do, is sort of demystifying that everything to do with Bitcoin is not blockchain. Bitcoin is one part of that. Ethereum is one part of that. But I think it's sort of building the wider ecosystem, and that basically is where people need to understand. And it's not something which people expected to know straight away. And if it's not affecting their everyday lives, then very frankly speaking, they wouldn't care. So let me give one example, and then I like to give analogies. No one would have said about a couple of decades ago that you'll use a single mobile phone to do everything, right from clicking photographs to basically using it as a boarding pass to enter your e-gates at the airport, to sort of maintaining other records or going to a meeting and making notes. And that's sort of one piece of technology. The way it has evolved, it's fantastic, and it's doing well in sort of a number of areas. If you just take cameras, I mean, the number of pixels that you get on one now, I mean, I don't know if when was the last time people, apart from doing it professionally, went out there and bought a camera, because you just buy a good mobile phone which gives you everything. So I think similar to that, coming back to blockchain and the use of it, is the promise is in the decentralization, but also the security of it. And once that's understood and used, the use cases are numerous. And as it develops, I think we'll see more and more firms thriving in this space.
Nice. That's what you said there, just around people don't really the general public don't really take notice of things until it actually affects their lives. And then it becomes normalized, right? Of, like you said, yeah. We don't think about our phones. My 10-year-old daughter's got her first phone and everything on it. And that generation is just, that's normal, right? So just talking then about, you said one of the big promises, security. So Deloitte talk a lot about trust in relationship to blockchain. Yeah. Could you just explain about why trust is so important to Deloitte in terms of its communication with blockchain?
So as an organization, obviously, we've been around for centuries, and our core ethos as a financial services auditor for a lot of the firms across various sectors out there has been is when you audit and come out with a report, that's the sort of a view that you're giving on a particular organization and how they're functioning. So I think the trust factor comes there, and it comes naturally to us and our peers as auditors, but also as advisors. And we have the privilege of working with some of the smartest brains out there. And when it comes to blockchain technology itself, is with the very centralized nature of it, and it being immutable, and it being sort of not requiring intermediaries in sort of the operation of it, and relying on consensus across peers, is that's what gives it sort of the trust, and that's what we have looked into. And Deloitte itself, especially from our headquarters, has invested a lot in understanding the technologies, the various blockchains that are out there, the various protocols that are out there, and we need to know it first in order to then serve clients around it, and especially auditing clients around the use of blockchain technology as well.
I think it's really interesting, right, of what you define as trust, because trust from a technology perspective makes total sense, the immutability side of it. But then the nature of trust in terms of your analogy of it's not owned by one big corporation, it's distributed across a network, so no one person owns it. Do people trust that of like, hang on a minute, the power now is in the people, the network running it to a degree? And there's a quite nice sort of strange dilemma between the technology is showing that it is what it is, it's immutable, but then how that is used and managed across the network, I suppose, is a different question.
Indeed, indeed. If you had to break this down, for example, in terms of how a lot of the sort of visionaries in the space see Web3 evolving. So when we had Web 1 and then Web 2, the idea is for the internet to be owned by people. And basically, Ethereum is a fantastic example where there are hundreds of firms out there which can build applications on it. And the validation of that is carried out using various Ethereum tokens out there, which are owned by people and then put forward for staking. Of course, you need to have regulations and a set of rules by which people adhere to and organizations adhere to. But as I said, it is something which will evolve over time. We won't have it straight away. So if you again have to take another analogy is when it comes to voting, and we basically sort of go out there and vote to elect a particular government every few years. It has evolved over the last century, and that's where sort of democracies have come up. Back in the day, you didn't have that, and it was sort of probably the most powerful and the one who could survive ruled. But I think that has changed, and we see the value of it because everyone has just one vote, but when it all comes together, it is quite powerful. In sort of everyone has their little say in what their future would look like. So I think that's the analogy I would put.
That makes a lot of sense, and I very much agree with you in terms of the potential and how that could be from a community ownership perspective. I'd love to know in terms of immediate opportunities, like as you're saying, and I think all three of us are very aware of this in terms of where we're at with the level of maturity with the technology, with how long some of these things take. I think all three of us have been through some of these cycles. And actually, even we were doing a video yesterday, and the person on the video yesterday, Mark, was talking about how, well, look what happened when the internet came out and how many people were like, this will never take off. So, you know, we've seen these cycles, we know how this goes. But I'd love to know, in terms of just for people watching this who are struggling to get their head around, like what is a use case where this makes sense, and in today's world, or like what are some of the specific, again, problems that could be solved today, even with where the technology is today? I'd love to know kind of your thoughts on that, and also any real examples that that could bring it to life for people.
Of course. There's one example which hasn't happened yet, but I do see it happening in the future, and probably sooner rather than later. And that would be something which would be sort of groundbreaking, and it would affect everyone, or most people out there who travel. So our passports, for example, currently it's a piece of paper, and which basically is used to sort of move across borders, used as a measure of identity, but more so just when you move by air, by road, by sea, and otherwise. There is no reason why in the sort of future it won't be digital, or it will be digital. And essentially, if it sits on a blockchain, that's where the immutability comes, that once it's registered to you, similar to how a 10-year pass was issued, it can't be tampered with. There's only one single record of it, and if it belongs to you, and let's say if it's sitting on a blockchain, accessible through an app on your phone, that's what we're using to prove your identity. And also every single time you don't have to sort of collect it and send it out in order to, let's say, get any services. It could essentially be accessed by companies, by people out there, similar to how you have digital records. So that's sort of one way. I mean, there are a number of companies who are innovating in KYC, CDD, or sort of the more advanced forms of those. So that's one use case. The other one is in general record keeping, and that can go across a number of sectors, whether it's medical records in the pharma industry, or whether it's let's say real estate records, or even sort of compliance records. So and then we basically get to come across a number of these as we work. So for example, some of the research we had done last year was around, can blockchain be used to maintain records, compliance check records when aircrafts are being built? And essentially, because that's a very, very cumbersome process where everything has to be noted, approved, and audited. The sheer sort of compliance and regulation standards required there. But then we came to the conclusion that it was actually not that viable, because at this stage it would have been expensive. So blockchain technology probably is not going to solve every single use case out there. But the industry that I come from, which is financial services, within that, the foremost case has been around payments, and how it can make payments operations quicker. And a lot of the solutions are live. And from an audience's perspective, today transactions happen in seconds, which is fantastic. And blockchain will only keep it to that. But it's at the back end of it where the use cases are important. So again, to give you another example, when I go out there and buy something with my credit card, on the face of it, it comes up straight away on my app, and I get my product or service which I've paid for. But the settlement happens end of day still. But blockchain technology and the use of distributed ledgers can actually make that real time, which could then free up a lot of liquidity for a number of players which are working at the back of this. So a lot of things which happen not in the public side, but which help companies operate more efficiently, are some of the use cases as well.
Absolutely incredible. Thank you, Mustafa, for talking. I mean, so much clearly makes so much sense what you've talked through, but also I just love how you talked through that in the language that you've used. I think it's incredibly accessible. It's really interesting. You know, one of my good friends lives in Estonia, and in Estonia, you maybe know this already, but in Estonia, actually how people have complete ownership of their records and give people access to it and then shut access down again. There are pockets where you can see a future. Like, he speaks to me about his medical records, his tax information, all of these things, none of which sits with the governments, with the healthcare systems, with the organizations. And from his perspective as a user of this technology, he's like, this is incredible. Like, what are you guys doing over there? Like, come on. And so you can see it in these pockets, but actually, and you can, like, the level of experience and the reduction in risk in terms of like people's information and where that's sitting and the security of it. I think it's really good to have brought to life those examples. And then also from a payments perspective and speed of transactions, and just that's something that's very close to my heart, that I'm doing a lot of work on, is really getting into micro transactions and looking at token-based micro transactions and where that could go in the future of that. And again, just I think the opportunities are huge when it comes to so much of what you're talking about. In terms of, so what I've got one last question, if that's okay. And actually I might just change this slightly. So if this isn't okay, you just have to tell me and I have to cut it.
Of course.
But I'm really interested, like, some of the examples that you gave talk to like government change and really government being involved in some of the changes, to make changes to things like passports, or to make changes to things like our information as citizens, and how like we're able to evolve like all of these tracks that currently exist and where information sits. I'm really interested in where you think compliance in the UK when it comes to blockchain-based technologies, like with compliance where it sits today and some of the changes that are being made, but also just generally how do I ask this question? But I don't have a huge amount of faith and trust in actually the people who could make some of the decisions that could have the biggest influence on the population. I don't have a huge amount of faith and trust that they have the right information and knowledge to be able to do some things that could be so innovative and to so many people's benefits when it's such a fast moving space. And I'd just be really curious if you're able to. I'd just be really curious in your thoughts, because you're probably much closer to some of the people at the point of making these decisions. But just, yeah, how you see compliance changing and some of the bigger things that could have such a big impact. Do you think that's possible? And what do you think the rest of us need to do to influence some of the change that could be hugely beneficial? Big question.
No, of course. I'll start with the second part of the question in terms of what we can do. As I said, government works with democratically with a lot of consultations which come out there, and they do listen to the people they are governing and serving. So if I remember correctly, when they came up with their first consultation around the use of a central bank digital currency, so which is a digital pound, I think it received over 50,000 responses. In terms of sort of should it come into force, should be used, and a number of questions around that. And I think this was for the Bank of England. In terms of how governments can act, I think the beauty of globalization and communications being so fast is that governments learn from each other, and they need to be competitive. So we're talking about Estonia earlier. If I have to take the example of India, which is a massive economy, it's in the top 5 out there, and essentially has a massive workforce. And one of the mandates of the last 2 or 3 governments has been to completely digitize how it operates, and that has brought about efficiencies by the truckloads, where there's something known as an Aadhaar card, which is sort of your digital identity. So you have your passports, but then not everyone travels. But Aadhaar is sort of compulsory for everyone. So everyone has a digital identity, and then that single identity record, which is held by the government centrally, which is accessible to individuals, is used for everything, right from registering for elections to serving your tax returns to obtaining medical aid if you need, or basically using that to register with the land registry, for example, when you're making a house purchase. Every single facet of life is basically affected by that one identity that you have, and there's a single record of it. So that's an example. But is when technologies develop, and if other countries are doing it, in the UK, we basically have the government wanting to learn and do more. So if I have to take the example of, let's say, central bank digital currencies, CBDCs again, is a few banks have innovated. There's 2 or 3 which are already live with it. But I think there's close to about 140 countries globally which are doing some kind of research and pilot projects around CBDCs. And it's expected that at least 7 or 8 CBDCs from G20 will be live in the next 5 to 10 years. So I think is the government consults and basically wants to hear, and then they also sort of globally learn from each other. So eventually, it may be slow, it may be really quick, but that inroads of technology will happen, I feel.
Would you say that, okay, on that point, would you say that we in the UK itself are in a good position then, from a in terms of how the government is innovating, pushing, lobbying for these? Are you comparing other countries and so on, that actually the UK government's quite ahead in terms of from a compliance perspective with blockchain?
From a compliance perspective, at least the intention is, and of course we have the EU as a counterpart to sort of measure ourselves. And so far, what we've heard, of course, there is intention to regulate crypto assets, which obviously sit on top of blockchains in all forms, including NFTs, and then sort of then make it available. And I think we were talking about trust earlier. Is if it's regulated, the trust automatically comes from the bigger organizations and the regulated organizations, because then they can sort of, without having to worry about being compliant or unregulated, offer those to customers. So the intention from Treasury is definitely there. But of course, we have a upcoming election, which will delay things. But then that's always the nature. But I think whoever comes back into government, the innovation agenda will still stand, because we are a global financial hub, but we are also a hub for many of sort of innovation and research and development that happens in a number of sectors, and that comes out of London. So I think innovation is not going to go away.
Amazing. I've just got one last question, Sarah. Sorry. So for the people watching this, if you were to start again, right, and you knew nothing about blockchain,
yeah,
but you were in financial services, what's the first couple of steps that you would take? What would you go and recommend that you go and do to be able to understand this technology?
Of course. I'll come back to technology again. So I'll use technology to solve the technology question. And again, this is how it has been changing, and I'm learning as well. Is if I would have been asked the question maybe a year ago, I would have said, you start researching online, you look for sort of courses which are available, and there's a lot of material which is on there by organizations like us, by other organizations, which basically sort of give you the messages and training. And all of this is freely available on the internet to learn, and in whichever form you like it. If you like to read, you pick up a book. If you like to go through videos, there's a lot of content which comes up in that sense. But now I would say is you would essentially use AI and tailor the question that you want to. And the response which comes on the back of that is fantastic as well. And I'm starting to use AI more and more in terms of what is available. And we have our own internal AI system which is available to us, which we can use as well for all work purposes, and that's fantastic. But I think if you ask the questions there, and if you ask the right questions, you will get the answers. So I think that's where people should start. And what I would also say is go wider than financial services, and also wider than some of the hype which comes across with Bitcoin and Ethereum and the ETFs around it, or how the price is going up or down. There's a lot more beneath than what we see on the surface.
100%. Mustafa, thank you. This has been incredible. I'm so grateful that you come and agreed to speak to us and do this video with us. I could talk to you for hours, but I'm so grateful. Thank you so much. And yeah, really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure speaking to you too. Thank you so much.
Thanks.